Warning. The contents of this podcast series often include sensitive subject matter and themes that might not be suitable for all viewers. Potentially triggering issues are discussed, and viewer discretion is advised.
If you or someone you care about are dealing with issues that impact their mental, emotional health, sexual health, or physical safety, please check out the resources linked in the bio or reach out to us directly. We are here to assist you toward emergency care and experts. Prioritize your well-being and sense of safety.
Hello, and welcome back to Shattered Foundations, Reconstructed Self, a podcast where we interview members of the deconstruction community to hear their stories and share them with the world. Here, we dive deeper into the process of deconstructing religion and then reconstructing yourself, who you are, what you believe, and how you are moving forward in rebuilding your personal foundation. I am your host, Tahir Dixon, joined today by my podcast partner and co-host with an astounding amount of patience, Garnet. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
Today, for episode 3, I couldn't be any more excited to introduce our guest. We have this Fitspo-worthy and increasingly more ripped by the day, quote-unquote, Benny's Seth with us. If you aren't familiar, you should be. But he's a staple of the community and a huge supporter of our creators. For today's episode, we get the honor of hearing Seth's full deconstruction story as he shares it for the very first time. Seth, how are you feeling about this?
Well, thank you for the introduction. That was very sweet of you.
Of course.
I'm feeling pretty excited about it. I was just thinking as you were introducing me and the podcast that it's part of the reason that I got so excited when I discovered this community in the first place was, finding people that actually wanted to hear my story. And It's just very validating, and it makes my heart happy that people want to hear what I have to say.
Well, I'm sure it makes you feel cared for, but also kind of validates what you've been through in your journey, the fact that it's something that other people want to hear, so I totally get that. And just for the record, Benny's Seth is referring to Crystal. She had told the story about when she first learned about Seth, the people that introducing him to her were referring to him as Benny's Seth. And I liked that. Seth is his own Seth, but he's also Benny's Seth. Let's be real.
For sure.
Oh, yeah.
Before we break down Seth's journey, I want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to our podcast. We hope that there's something you'll take away with you. Make sure you like, share, comment, click that notifications bell so you are always getting up to date on the latest episode of Shattered Foundations, Reconstructed Self. We release new episodes every Sunday. And with that, Seth, if you would, tell us your story and what are your earliest experiences with religion?
So I grew up in the church. Some of my earliest memories are being in Sunday school or at the nursery. And because my parents, so my grandparents on my mom's side, my grandpa was a Unitarian preacher. And I mean, for the most part, I'm like, yeah, you guys are cool. But growing up, and honestly, I don't even know 100% how my mom got into it. But from our perspective, my grandparents were not true Christians. That was something that I always grew up hearing. And I actually remember 2 specific memories. One of my mom trying to essentially convert my grandpa, so her dad. And obviously, I mean, he's a preacher, so he knows stuff. Right. And it did not go well. And then there was another time where my grandparents were visiting and they went to church with us. And of course, that Sunday, one of the things that our pastor touched on was that Unitarians were false Christians.
They didn't.
Yeah. So it's just
I'm sure God gave him that message.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all that's to say that, from a very early age, I was raised in the church. I went to something called Awana, which I don't know if either of you
I know
are familiar with that. So So I was a spark, and then I don't remember what the next phase was called, but I was in it until the end. Like I remember going to these competitions where you would have to memorize certain Bible verses, and then the physical aspect, there's a game. And I remember, like, I've never been a sports person. I've never been super coordinated. And there's this game where you would have to run around these pins. And then, like, after you ran around all the pins, you would run to the middle and get the orange pin, and you won. And now that I'm thinking about it, it's like there were a lot of injuries related to that. It's like kids landing in the middle at the same time and like butting heads.
Ouch.
You know, we played in the auditorium, so we would move all the chairs, and there'd be like rug burn, which that carpet is like really rough.
Yeah.
But I think I got the orange pen like one time, and that was one of my proudest moments.
Good for you and your one pin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Or you would get like Sparky Bucks or something, some bullshit like that. And you could go spend it at the store and get like candy and, you know, little toys and stuff.
Wow.
And one time there was a kid who he ran a whole Sparky Bucks counterfeiting
what?
ring.
That's
he
actually hilarious.
Yeah.
That is actually hilarious.
He went to Kinko's and just printed out a bunch of copies and made his own Sparky Bucks. But I think he got discovered. You know, if you're gonna do something like that, it's got to be incognito. You can't just be like, you never memorize any Bible verses, you never participate or really show up.
Like you got the mountain bike.
Yeah, you have thousands of Sparky Bucks.
Making it rain Sparky Bucks. That's funny.
There are gonna be questions.
Right.
Ones and fives.
So I was very involved in that. When I got into high school, you know, of course, doing youth group stuff, being pretty involved in that. And when I was a senior in high school, we had I think even at the time, I started realizing how cringe this was, but there was a special Bible study for the extra spiritual kids in our church. And I just remember going to that, and we had this other guy that he felt like he was called to be, I can't remember the exact term for it, but basically to call other people out and shake people that weren't walking in the faith correctly.
Is narc the word you were thinking of?
Yeah, that's close. But, you know, he was pointing to a specific Bible verse, but I don't remember which one it was, or it was a series of verses. And I just remember thinking who do you think you are?
Oh yeah.
Even back then I was like, man, that's that does not sit right with me.
Weird.
And so I stopped going to that. And then I remember one of my friends wrote this he subtweeted me on her blog and was she didn't call me out by name, but I 100% knew it was about me. And she was just thought that I was, which I guess she was right, losing faith or just wasn't very nice. And I just remember getting really pissed about that because I'm
no, she didn't.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there are 6 people that read this blog, so I'm pretty sure they're going to know who you're talking about.
Oh, right. So it was a call out kind of.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I turned 18 my senior year of high school, and I can't remember if it was the summer before my senior year or the summer after I was done with high school, but I had started to slowly come out to my friends. There was nobody that really knew, or at least people had their suspicions, and I definitely got called gay a lot, and it, you know, really bothered me because I was so closeted, and as an insult. And being in a small town, my hometown has 220 people in it.
Wow.
And
my
And
God.
the high school that I went to was, my graduating class was like 130. So, I've talked to people from like Western Nebraska where their graduating class was like 20 people, something like
Wow.
that. In comparison to that, it wasn't that isolated or rural, but it's basically just a bunch of small towns in the area that go to this high school. And prior to that, from first through sixth grade, I was homeschooled by my mom. And the whole like Abeka Books program, which is just Christian based.
Yeah, I
Very
remember that.
Yeah, very little science and just subtle, but probably not so subtle if we looked back, ways of making sure that your kids are fully indoctrinated from the get-go.
Yeah, not learning too much, just enough.
Yeah, exactly. And I was homeschooled through sixth grade, and then I think it was because my mom and I were driving each other crazy that we started looking for a different school for me to go to.
I was going to ask that actually, like, what was the catalyst that took you from homeschool to public schools? But that's
Yeah,
funny.
I think we just we were together 24/7 and we just ended up butting heads a lot and
naturally.
Yeah, and we went and looked at a few different like smaller schools, and then I ended up for whatever reason going to a Seventh-day Adventist school. We were not Seventh-day Adventist, but it was kind of like, oh, this is close enough to what we believe, kind of like the basics are the same, and we think like this will be a way for you to be at least a little more integrated into society, but not like fully going to a public school. It was still very small. Like it was essentially like a one-room school inside of the Seventh-day Adventist college and like city that's nearby to us.
Wow.
And yeah, so I did that for 2 years, and that was definitely an experience too. Learned a lot about Seventh-day Adventism and, some of their wild history.
Did they ever try to convert you?
No, not necessarily, but I did hear a lot of like, essentially like how proud they were of celebrating the Sabbath on the correct day, and like there's just and there's just no way around it. And I was just like, who cares? But also on Fridays we would have like story time, and the teachers would read out of this book, which I think is a very old book about like one of their founders. Her name's like Helen White or something like that. And I just remember like one of the stories, at least very early on, the Seventh-day Adventists like had thought they had figured out when Jesus was coming back. The people that like sold all their shit and were literally like waiting on top of a hill for Jesus to come back, and obviously that never happened. And I think about stuff like that and I'm like, how does a religion survive after something like that? Like you would think people would be like, I like gave my farm away, like this isn't in like the 1800s, it's just like I gave everything away thinking that I didn't need to worry about it anymore because it's earthly possessions. You're supposed to be storing up your treasures in heaven, and like you're totally screwed.
Yeah, I think what it probably is like the leaders, if you will, cult leaders especially, are really, really good at bullshitting. So I'm sure there was something that they pulled out their ass that everybody believed, and everybody went on with their lives. God told them something or another, or either way, that they didn't say oopsie my bad, and I think that just speaks to the insidiousness of cults and cult leaders, as they can literally get people, the right kind of people, or like people in the right situation or frame of mind, to believe anything they say, and it's so dangerous. I had a question because I'm not super knowledgeable about the different branches. So you said that your grandpa was what kind of Christian?
Unitarian.
Unitarian.
It's very liberal.
Oh.
And like, it's a little like, especially growing up, like we were non-denominational, which I would say is just kind of like baseline evangelical is what I call it. But at least for us, it was still very much like, you have to believe that Jesus died on the cross for you. You have to believe that you are a sinner in need of forgiveness. And, you know, there's other like peripheral things like just church doctrinal stuff on top of that. But
Sure.
I would say those were like the crucial things, at least from what I remember. You know, my grandparents might have said, yeah, sure, we believe that, but they weren't like, you know, super gung-ho about that. I think probably for them, church was more of a community thing. And that is one thing that, like, I'll give it up to, like, the Unitarians for, is, like, they're very much, at least in my experience, believers and quality, and, like, they're not out there holding picket signs in front of clinics and,
Like
and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll say too, I've also seen Unitarian churches host non-Christian events, or even host other religious, like allow other religions like Buddhism to host like weekly meetings in their buildings. Like they're not showing up to picket and harass people as they're seeking reproductive care. You know, that's like the baseline. But what I've noticed about Unitarian churches is that they also tend to not like hoard their resources as much as other churches do. So they'll let another religion come in and have like ceremonial stuff or whatever.
Yeah, they're very big on like interfaith stuff.
Interfaith dialogue.
Okay.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, as far as churches
But
go.
yeah, exactly. So my thing with that though is, if we are like, you know, just cool with everybody, and like if we're supporting this interfaith dialogue, I can't help but think like, what's the point of any of this?
What's the point of the doctrine?
Yeah. Because at least for Christianity, it's like one way. I feel like, at least that's what I grew up hearing, is like
everything else is shunned, othered.
Exactly. We even had in Sunday school, we had such bullshit because it was branded as like, oh, we're going to learn about other faiths, but it just turned into like a bashing session. And that was obviously not a healthy interfaith dialogue there, but
it was more like propaganda than interfaith. Yeah.
But the idea was like, you're allowed to like learn about these other things. You just have to acknowledge that at the end of the day, this is the right way.
Okay, because I was wondering, what was it about your grandpa or your grandparents, the way that they practiced religion, that made them not real Christians in your mother's view? But is it just kind of the stuff that you outlined?
Yeah, just like, I would say more like doctrinal stuff. And probably because I don't think the whole sinner's prayer was even really a concept to them. And I always grew up thinking like, I remember being really sad about this a lot. My grandparents are not going to go to heaven. And it's like having a lot of anxiety about that. But it's like, as a kid, how do you convince an adult? So you just kind of feel like you're stuck in the middle. To answer your question, it's just more like, not so much the emphasis on accepting Jesus into your heart, admitting that you're a sinner, and the whole ritual.
So just literally not quote unquote Christian enough is what it is.
I would say, yeah.
You're skipping over the blood part of the cult.
Right.
So you still have a doctrine and you still have quote unquote teachings, but it is a blood cult. And that human sacrifice portion, or human God sacrifice portion, that's a core tenet of it. And so the more you kind of lean away from that, the more you kind of get that side eye, you know, in the Christian community. So they do pose a unique issue. A lot of those churches will have like ordained like leaders, preacher, pastors, I'm not sure what titles that they hold for those, but who are openly gay, or who are married to they'll be in a same-sex marriage, and they host marriages and will marry same-sex couples in their churches. So And that's already kind of one thing, but again, what Seth was saying, they really lean away from the blood part of the blood cult. And that is where you really kind of get into the hot waters of hellfire, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
There's a couple different veins that I want to revisit. So one, this anxiety, especially as a young person. Something that I find interesting about your story that really resonates with me is you're sort of seeing this multi-generational conflict between your parents' generation, your grandparents' generation, and then yourself, and, you know, figuring out where you stand in relation to both of those generations. And something you said struck me about worrying about not seeing your grandparents in heaven and the anxieties that come with that. How old were you? Do you remember how old you were when that kind of realization really struck you, when that kind of really set in for you?
It's hard to think of like a specific age, but probably like single digit ages.
Like in grade school?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Because at that point I had already, said the sinner's prayer, and probably several times where I felt like I, for whatever reason, had to like recommit myself to Jesus, because it was just something that if I felt like I had been really bad or I'd strayed away occasionally, I would feel like I had to like reset or like redo it.
As a kid?
Yeah.
Wow. See, because that's one of the things that I really hate. I'm glad we went back here, is the amount of like stress and worry that you had as a kid, just even from like the standpoint of your grandparents, is so awful. And religion is like one of the only things that'll do that to you in that way.
Right. Not just my grandparents, remembering it, and they like literally set up a cross, like a wooden cross, and then everybody got like a sticky note, and you're supposed to write somebody's name that you had in mind, somebody that you knew wasn't saved, but you wanted to bring them to Jesus. And you wrote that person's name on there, and then, you would stick it to this cross. And then if you happen to win their soul, you would take your sticky note off, something like that. And I remember I eventually just completely forgot about it. I think a lot of people did. But, thinking about that person, and then just even people that I didn't know, like I remember thinking about certain like secular musical artists that I liked, and being like, they're not going to go to heaven because I don't, they're not Christian. And the fear of hell, like for yourself and then for others,
for people that you care about,
based on the things that I grew up hearing, and as kids, I just remember felt like we were trying to freak each other out with how like messed up is your idea of like, what is hell going to be look like, or what is hell going to be like, and what is it going to feel like. And I remember having this idea of like being on one of those like twisty slides, and you're on it forever though, like you just go around and around and around, and it never ends. And just stuff like that. Or like,
that sounds fun though. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, for a little bit. And then it's like, okay, I want to get off this ride.
Right.
But any sort of like loop like that, is just,
because it's eternity.
Yeah.
And so
it's forever.
As a young child, already still trying to develop a coherent concept of time, still trying to navigate, what is 20 minutes? What is 5 minutes? You're trying to navigate already how time operates in this body, in this lifetime. And at such a young age, while you're still getting into your own body, still learning how your own body works, still learning how time works, on planet Earth, in the Earth plane, you're also grappling simultaneously with this concept of eternity. And I find that really fascinating, in that it's a similar experience to something that I went through, and coming to terms with that big concept. That's a really big concept for someone that is psychologically still developing, physically still developing. They're still learning how to get coordinated in their own body. They're still learning how to speak the words of their language. They haven't even been given the transmission of the language that they're speaking. They're still having to go to school, but being forced to face this concept of eternity and then attaching suffering to that. Yeah, that was a source of a lot of anxiety for myself as well. And there were a lot of people that I was worried about, that I lost sleep over. And, even as you're talking, I think I'm starting to realize that I remember being younger and dealing with what I now understand to be insomnia. And I feel like a lot of that was due to the anxieties of either myself not going to heaven or someone that I care about not going to heaven. And especially if that person was an adult, the sense of powerlessness was even greater, because you have to grapple with the respectability politics of age. Who am I to tell you what to do? How do I witness to someone that's older than me? Because we're only ever really taught to witness to our peer groups and younger. As we get older, it starts to kind of broaden. But as kids, they want you going out into the world and getting other kids your age. Well, we're not just connected to other kids our age. We're connected to other people in our family, the bus driver, the person at the post office. As we start to be out and navigate around in the world and we meet other adults, hopefully in safe kinds of ways, those then become attachments, and then comes the curiosity. Am I not going to see this person when I die? And then having to contemplate, what does eternal suffering look like for them? But still having to deal with the fact that, I like my teacher, I want my teacher to go to heaven, but that's my teacher. So the power dynamic doesn't allow for a child to, witness, quote unquote, to an adult, if I'm making any sense here.
Yeah.
So you're forced at a young age, at a premature age, to grapple with this concept of eternity. You're sort of burdened with the task of bringing in people in your peer group into, quote unquote, the light, but then you also have to grapple with the sense of helplessness that comes from not being in a position to witness to other people that you care about or come to care about or form bonds and attachments to, who are adults, who are older than you. So it's not easy. This is not at all an easy religion for kids.
No, and that's awful. At this point, having talked to, a few different people and hearing their stories, it's so sad to think of kids, like on one hand, you've got guilt, and then on the other hand, you've got fear, which are two things that, are traumatic, that can impact how you grow into an adult, but are so, may not even necessarily be there if not for the religion, so it just, again, speaks to how harmful it can be.
Absolutely.
I want to circle back to this other thread here where you had talked about something else I also resonated with. You talked about the way that the character of people, when the mask starts falling off, and you talked about being part of this group, and then you decided not to go to this group anymore for the super elite special chosen task force. And they then determined, or one of them then determined, that you're the no Scotsman's kind of fallacy, or that you're losing faith. My bad, that you're losing faith. Or not you, someone that we know, wink wink, someone we know, someone who was in the group and is now not in the group, someone is losing faith. And you kind of are now grappling with, because you were like a teenager when this was occurring, right?
Right. I think
okay.
I was a senior in high school.
Okay, yes. So you're getting, kind of easing on over into adulthood and seeing the way that people hide their own kind of bullshit behind religion. So what becomes that turning point for you when you start to see people for who they are in that sense?
So going back to when I started to come out to my friends, I would say that was a big thing because I definitely, had people that were supportive, but with caveats, I would say. And I wanted to obviously be accepted so badly, and it was very difficult for me to come out, especially in the beginning. I mean, it slowly got easier. I think, if they showed any sort of positive reaction, I just kind of like took it. But then when I started to poke at it a little bit and learn a little bit more, it was like, this is who I am. But the reaction that I was getting from certain people was kind of like, well, we can get through this together. And it was kind of like not affirming. It was like, well, it's not like I have cancer. I'm just saying that
that's what came to mind for me. I was gonna say, so it's like you told them you have cancer.
And like I'm still gonna be gay, and this isn't a phase. It's not something that I'm going to like pray or work through as much as some people would like me to. And I knew people, I will meet people still occasionally that are like, well, my best friend doesn't believe in gay marriage. And I'm like, well, then they shouldn't gay marry.
And don't have one.
It's really easy. Basically, it's like, this is a part of me. Like, sure, like it's not my entire identity, but this is me, guys. And like, I'm not gonna do this thing where it's like, you don't agree, but you still support me. Like, I'm sorry, that's not, that does not compute. And I knew certain people that like thought I was being too harsh. And like, when I came out to my parents, it did not go super well. And I remember specifically, I had one friend that I was telling them how like I was pissed off because my parents were like not being cool about stuff, and they wanted me to go to this. It was called Love One Out, and it's like
I'm sorry, did you say Love One Out?
Love One Out, like
that's
it's some focus on the family bullshit, and it was like a conference where talking about like conversion therapy. And shortly after I came out, they were like trying to get me to go to this thing, and I was just like, absolutely not. I'm not going to that. And I was like, and why are you going to that? What is this? And my mom said something like, well, we don't know anything about it. And I was just like, well, you could like talk to me. You have a gay son. Like, why are you going to this conference with a bunch of evangelicals and liars
and expect them to tell you more than your son, who is the one that's going
exactly and just stuff like, oh, well, like, this is really hard for us, and
oh my goodness,
just
not being like cool that. Like you said.
Exactly. And so I, was complaining to one of my friends about this, and essentially said the same thing that I had explained to both of you, that it's like, this is who I am. I was kind of taking a hard stance on it, where I'm like, if you can't accept this part of me, or if there's going to be like weird caveats to our relationship, then you just get none of me. Like, I guess
I love that.
We're just, and my friend was like, well, not necessarily. And basically, like, her husband at the time, which they're divorced now, and he was comparing it to like alcoholism or smoking.
Oh my
God. I was just like, okay. And they were over at my house, and I was just like, okay, well, you can go.
Right. Like, have a good night.
Kind of over this. And it just kind of felt like a slap in the face, because, like I said, I think I wanted that acceptance so much that I was taking any sort of like...
You were settling. Partial acceptance.
It was just like, you're 100% right. I was settling, to find out, no, they really, like, deep down, they still have these silly ideas about, well, it doesn't align with what the Bible says, and so they just can't support it. And so like that was really frustrating. And I literally called one of my other friends to, tell them about what they had said and that I was upset. And they said to me, well, Seth, like, I think it's wrong too.
Oh,
And
man.
I was just like, okay, what the hell?
Does anybody love and support me here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm so
just feeling
sorry.
like I didn't have anybody to turn to. And she had said something like, well, if my kid was gay, I would be upset too. And I'm just like, well, why? And I mean, I think she tried to walk it back a little bit and be like, well, because they would just have a harder life or something like that.
Sure. Okay.
And
Right.
yeah, right.
That's the problem.
Yeah, that's what you care about. I eventually was just like, okay, whatever. I guess this is how it's gonna be. And she I don't think I necessarily hung up on her. Maybe I did, but the conversation ended, and then she called me back, and she was like bawling, like, you're my best friend. I love you so much. And I was just like, well, I don't know how to feel about anything right now because, like I said, that's me. I'm not gonna do this BS where I've gotta pretend to be something else. And there was some other shenanigans with that friend where she would tell me she was praying for me, and she was encouraging me to read my Bible. And I mean, I was not into that anymore.
That was going to be my next
for
question.
a long time.
Oh,
it had been a long time. Yeah.
So what's that gap then? So because when you were in that group in high school, you're saying you didn't believe still at that point?
Well, I was still trying to believe. I still called myself a Christian, but it had started, already. There was one point I read this book for a class. It's just called Night by Eli Wiesel, or I think that's how you pronounce it. And it's his memoir about his experience in concentration camp. And it's absolutely brutal. Of course it is. And I just remember the stuff that he talks about in that book and just that whole situation, any story about that or any atrocity like that. How can there be a God when this is the kind of stuff that happens in what's supposed to be his world? I was just like, this is insane. So I remember having a really hard time with that, and I was telling my friends about it, and the reaction I got was generally kind of like, well, it's kind of the same crap that we hear on lives. It's like, well, it's not God's fault.
We have free will.
It's man. Yeah, we have free will.
Eve ate
man that does
apple.
that. Yeah. And I think eventually I just kind of pushed that under the rug for a while. And then, like I said, I started to come to terms with sexuality and just was, I still called myself a Christian, but the cracks were starting to show for sure. And then when I went to college, I was in this class where it was all about hunter-gatherer societies and the advent of agriculture and really interesting stuff. But essentially the idea that I got from it was everything about Christianity for one, and then I think just religion as a whole, just based on a lie and overpopulation concerns, because it's basically the idea, this guy's writings, it was all about once we got into agriculture, we just created this whole messed up system of hoarding resources and health wise, we have removed ourselves from the food chain, and we live much longer lives, but we've created so many problems for ourselves, essentially. But part of that was learning about the ways that religion, specifically Christianity, was touched on and like is used to keep people down, and a lot of ideas that really challenge my frame of reference, because I remember getting like very angry when I heard those things at first, because it's like, you know, you're coming for my faith, and you know, that was all that I ever knew, you know. And while I feel like I thought outside of the box prior to that in certain ways, it was still a wake-up call for me.
Yeah.
So that was a big thing. And then my friend Erica that I mentioned earlier, she went to the same college, and I remember like I was really struggling with sexuality, and I had actually like made a deal with God. Like I was praying every night to just be like turned straight. I just wanted to be straight. I didn't want to deal with this anymore. I didn't want to be different. And essentially it was like, if you do this for me, like I'll like go all in, you know, like I'll do whatever you want. Like laying in my little single, you know, dorm bed, and like praying, and obviously like nothing ever happened, and told Erica that I wanted to talk. And it's like late at night, we laid in the grass by the library, and I told her like about my deal and like what I had been going through, and she was just like there's nothing wrong with it, and just you know, like it doesn't work like that. Like you can't just like change yourself. You can't pray away the gay. And not only can you not do that, like it's not necessary. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. And I think at that point I was just like, you know what? You're right. Like, fuck this. I'm not doing it anymore. So I think that was like, if I can think of a point where I'd like my official breakup with God, that would probably be it.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, you were begging, like, change me so I can be what you want me to be, and he couldn't do it. So I'd break up with him too. I mean, shit.
Yeah, people say they'll like question if you really tried. And my story is just one of so many, and people who went through way wilder shit than I did, and truly like were suffering and crying out to God, and they're not getting an answer. And for people to say like that you didn't try, or to not believe you,
it's the ultimate disrespect.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate invalidation of personal experience, which is so funny because that's all that they write on for their faith is personal experience.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, you're 100% right.
Yeah. And that to me just kind of affirms the hypocrisy of the entire religion itself, because that's, well, the hypocrisy is one thing, but it's the delusions of it. Because if they were to take you at your word that what you are saying is real, the way that they want to be taken at their word, that they felt the Holy Spirit and right? If they were to take you seriously the way that they would want to be treated, then they would have to reconcile the fact that either God made somebody gay or somebody chose to be gay, going outside of God's will, right? Invalidating God's will for their life, and couldn't turn them straight.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's different from I have diabetes and, you know, I'm praying to get better. You know, that's different from other kinds of things. Like, it's personal in a different kind of way. I'm not saying, you know, lifelong illnesses are not serious kinds of things, but when it comes to something like sexuality, it is so deeply tied to the doctrine about one man, one woman, of, you know, of the son will leave his father or his family and cling to his wife, you know, so that it's a very heteronormative document, even as it details horrendous things regarding, you know, PDF files. But generally, especially in the Old Testament, it is a very heteronormative doctrine. So that makes it different from the kinds of pretzels that Christians need to do to justify cancer, is different from the rejection of sexuality, because someone having cancer is not necessarily condemned to hell for having cancer, versus a doctrine that teaches something like your sexuality, your admission into heaven is going to depend on something like that. And God is equally not able to change either of those circumstances. Well, let me ask you this. You were in the group, like the super elite, you know, Holy Spirit filled, you guys had your color rings. How closely were you sticking to the Bible itself? Were you invested in the Bible? Were you more like Sadak Mac Bivtaj? Were you like, where did you fall in terms of, do I find this document believable?
When I read the Bible now, or when I hear somebody read the Bible, I am like frequently reminded that I did not know shit about that book. So I still have my old study Bible because we completed some class, I think it was in the 8th grade, some Sunday school class, and we each got a study Bible with our names engraved on them. So I have one with my name engraved on it.
Is it engraved in gold?
It is. It is. Yeah. And because it's a study Bible, it has like guided reading check boxes. So like read the Bible in a year, you know, like, and I have it still from like probably like 1999 or 2000, somewhere around there. I have one. I have Genesis 1 checked. And that was it. Stop.
You're like, good enough.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, we're good. So
you know that sense of accomplishment you get when you check off the box? Seth like just coasted on that for a decade.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you mean I'm not a good Christian? I read Genesis 1.
Yeah. I have proof in my study Bible.
Right.
I can show you. But like I said, I went to Awana, so like I know a bunch of like those verses that are, you know, like the Romans 3:23 and the John 3:16, stuff like that. And like I definitely recognize some of the prophecy, non-prophecy verses that Christians will quote, like by his stripes we are healed. I definitely remember that one from Awana. So I knew that, but like there's just so much, like so many wild stories that like I don't remember hearing about the she-bears and Elisha.
Of course. And
there was one, who was it? Like another like prophet, they were having like a magic off. And it was like trying to, you know, decide which God was better, if it was Baal or you know, Yahweh. And at the end of it, God's prophet like goes berserker and murders like, what is it, like 40 of their priests or something like that.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it's like, wait,
because you're all dead.
Right.
This is Team Yahweh? Like, this is supposed to be cool? You know, I don't remember this at all. And like a couple of weeks ago, Benny and I read like all of Esther. I read it out loud and we just like giggled about it the entire it's pretty interesting. It's pretty exciting. Yeah. And you know, I didn't really know anything about, like I knew who Esther was, but I didn't know the details of a lot of that stuff. So I just had like this very broad overview.
Which, I mean, that is the case for most people. And, you know, I guess it just kind of depends, because my aunt, I was just talking to her recently, and she's the one that, Seth, I don't know if you heard my episode, but I lived with her for a while in Vegas and went to her church, and it was like one of those weirdo cult ones. But they were like really encouraged to read the Bible and to really study it. So I'm sure she knows cover to cover every single thing that happened. But to know those things and still be in it, I feel feel like that would be, I find that really interesting. And I was asking her, and she was like, at the time I would kind of go, but then, I just brush it under the rug or make excuses. And so I was going to say, I feel like they don't want people to know those things, the really bad things, but maybe it doesn't even matter, because if you knew them, it wouldn't even make a difference. Say that.
Yeah. I definitely remember a sermon where it was like apologetics for like thou shalt not kill, like the contradiction between thou shalt not kill, then how much like
Killing
commanded killing there is in the Bible. And it was just like, well, these are the times when it's okay. Like in war was one of them. And, I don't really remember the details, but I do remember hearing that, or just like seeing a list of like, well, except for these situations where basically like this is where God either commanded somebody to kill somebody else, or he just like struck somebody dead because they lied or looked back at the only home that they ever knew.
Right. Yeah, and actually, I don't know how this will really relate to the course that we're on, but one of the things that I, did want to say is like, especially when we talk about, like sexuality and the religion and the way that Christians approach that part of the Bible, am I wrong in saying almost everything that addresses like homosexuality is in the Old Testament, or is there stuff in the New Testament that talks about it?
There is stuff in the New Testament, but it's all. And it's also, Jesus never said anything about it. And I think even like the parts in the New Testament, it never said like homosexual until that's where that, I don't know if you've heard about that 1946 documentary. But it's basically talking about how in, I think it was 1946, that the word homosexuality was added to the Bible.
Okay, I think I have heard
and
I think prior to that, in the King James Version, used the word, I think it was sodomites. That wasn't even a good translation, I guess. So there was always kind of an agenda around inserting the idea of homosexuality into the New Testament.
Yeah. Okay. And the reason that I was asking is because I know like Leviticus is the big one that people point to in, right, which is Old Testament, right? Or is that New Testament?
No, it's Old Testament.
Right. Old Testament.
Yeah.
But, if you've ever heard like Rebel Rabbi talk about it, or other people that know Hebrew, that it's not even what it's talking about. And I guess from what I understand, like they wouldn't have even had the same concept of homosexuality as we do. Like, as far as two people of the same gender being in a committed relationship.
Okay. Yeah. But to land the plane, the reason that I was asking is because, if that's what they like to come back to, say that it's wrong, how can you in one breath say, well, we have the New Testament, the New Covenant, Jesus came to fulfill the law. We don't follow the Old Testament rules, but then double back and say, except that one where, men should not lay with men or whatever.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. Like I keep hearing that lately, that people will say that, no, we don't follow the old rules. We don't follow the old rules. And then it's just like, but you do then, right? If that's your reference point for why, my gay marriage is wrong. So, all of that to say, all of those, Christians who had such a problem, with your sexuality may not have even had a leg to stand on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I remember like when I was still a Christian, but was, starting to have issues because it's like, well, I gotta like reconcile this with sexuality. And I remember doing research, like looking online and trying to see, because I had heard other people talk about more context about like the clobber passages, as they call them, and trying to to, like, I guess, do my own version of apologetics. And I remember, like, trying to bring that up with my dad, and, like, I had brought it up with other people too, and it was, like, completely dismissive, you know, like, oh, well, you got to be really careful with that. And like I said, it's very similar to the stuff that we hear on a daily basis on lives, because people are just, like, so set in their ways. And I remember
they already
like,
know what they want to believe.
Exactly. And, like, I thought about this a long time ago when I was, you know, being faced with just not being supported, and, like, just kind of seeing, like, how people were reacting to stuff. And I just noticed how, like, I felt like people have visceral reaction to it. The, like, seeing people of the same gender, like, be affectionate in any way, or even, like, acknowledging their relationship. And I noticed a lot of people, like, using their religion as an excuse to be a bigot. But then on the other hand, like, using it as a reason, like, not as an excuse, but, like, I don't know. I noticed that a lot of different people, where it's like, okay, some people are like, well, I'm totally cool, but my religion says it's wrong. And then some people just being, like, way more open-chested about it, or, like, full-chested about it, just, like, being like,
I don't like this, and I have this backup for why I shouldn't.
Exactly.
It's a good point.
But I felt like there was a lot of hiding behind certain things and wishy-washiness, and, like I said, I don't think that our relationships should be like that. You know, and it's not that we have to agree on everything, but there are certain like human rights things,
non-negotiables.
Non-negotiable. And it's just kind of like, why would I waste my time with people that gonna have to, like, worry about how I come off to them, or, like, am I being too gay right now, or you know, like, stuff like that, where you should not have to worry about that if it's somebody who's your true friend.
I agree wholeheartedly. And that, actually, I was gonna ask previously too, and then I'll stop monopolizing, I'm sorry. So you had your friend Erica in college that was just kind of, like, in that conversation, laid it out, like, you know, this is okay, you don't have to change yourself, and you couldn't if you tried, it doesn't work like that. Was this the first time that somebody actually said that to you, or is it the first time that you actually heard somebody saying it to you because you were at that point where you were trying so hard and really struggling?
I would say that was probably the first time that somebody had actually said that to me. I mean, Erica had probably, like, said that to some degree in the past, but I think for the most part, she was, like, as far as people that I cared about that much, she was the only one that was like, I'm gonna put you above. I mean, she had already gone through her own deconstruction journey at that point. And I think she was, like, fully, had left the faith before I did. And so it, like, wasn't even a factor for her. And I would say, like, even some of my friends that, like, didn't have an issue with it, there was still, like, I got the sense that they still, like, wanted me to not be gay.
They were pulling for you.
Yeah. So just, like, not even from, like, a religious standpoint, but just, I think, general
bigotry,
like, just bigotry and not being comfortable with it being new to them, I guess. I would say, I'm thinking back, and for the most part, it was Erica that was, like, the only one who
ride or die support.
Like, fully had my back and was telling me I didn't need to change. I wasn't broken. It wasn't anything that I could change, even if I wanted to.
We love Erica.
I'm so glad you had that. A lot of people don't get that, and it can bring people to a very dark place. So I'm glad you have that, for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of wild that even I think after that, because I went on a few missions trips to Mexico when I was in high school.
Oh.
And I actually went one more time my freshman year of college with my old church. And I think this was like pretty much at the end of my leaving my faith. Yeah. So like I'd already like said I was gonna go, but I think it was more like I was with, my friends that I knew from going in years past. One of my other good friends was a year younger than me. So like basically like I was gonna be able to hang out with them for a week and like, I liked helping with the kids because like we would go, I think a couple of years in a row we went to an orphanage and like did work there and just like spent time with the kids. And I wanted to do that. I even at that time I was like, I don't even really like care about like
Quote,
this
unquote,
proselytizing.
saving.
I actually don't even really want to do that at all. I just want to like
you are a good person
spend time
and you
with
wanted
these
to
kids
help.
because like they clearly like loved it, and like it was also generally like a pretty good time, I felt like. And I just remember I think it might have been the last night, like every night at the end we would like have a group talk about the day and pray and stuff like that. And I just remember having a like slightly heated discussion with the leaders because they essentially were trying to say that it doesn't matter how much time we spend with these kids or like how long they remember this, blah, blah, blah. Our goal is still to, quote, save them, unquote.
Wow.
And I just remember being like, well, I kind of feel like that's secondary at this point. Like, isn't it better that we just show up for them and spend time with them and like
help them make a difference to their lives?
We're still like, we can still do it in the name of Jesus or whatever, but like, we don't maybe have to like tell them they're going to go to hell or like push it on them or something like that. And it was just kind of like got a little contentious because clearly at that point I was already like, I don't really care about this part of it anymore. I think about that and I was like, what was I doing? Like I was already like, an atheist and I was just like
just wanted to flight to Mexico real quick.
Pretending to be a missionary.
Yeah, and I think that's because at your core, you are a good person, and what you saw was an opportunity to have fun with your friends, but also to make a difference in someone else's life. And I think that was probably more attractive than any of the religion that really came with it. That's what I'm hearing anyway.
Well, thank you.
Also, too, I'm glad that you pushed back on that point because we just talked about the kinds of anxieties that come with indoctrination as a child. And I like that you were able to be the adult that should have been there for the kid Seth. And you could, do what you could do to stop that from being perpetuated onto the next generation. So, yeah, thanks for speaking up.
Yeah. So we're in college. You're already basically an atheist. You've already come out. You had this last mission trip. And then what does it look like after that?
So I feel like I just kind of didn't think about it for a while. I didn't even really go to church in college. Like after I started going to college, that was pretty much the end of me going to church. I think about it now, and like one thing that I think about frequently is just like how fucking bored I was. Like sitting in church and like trying to pay attention, undiagnosed ADHD, and like it was just daydreaming time for me mostly. Like, yeah, if you're not engaged, it's so boring, and
Yep.
it was so long. And so I think I was just so relieved to not be forced to endure that anymore.
Yeah.
Be like, oh my God, I can like sleep in on Sunday and not have to like pretend and all that bull crap.
So it was fairly easy for you then to move away from church life.
Yeah, it actually
Okay.
was.
Okay.
I think I was just so like, I was so over it at that point that it felt very, very good. And I mean, I think that's another sign of just how like not meant for me it was. Because like clearly I just walked away and never looked back.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't really think about it too much for a while, other than I did hold on to that fear of hell for quite a while. That was one thing that I would say up until probably just a few years ago. So I'm 38 now, and I haven't really believed for 17 years, probably. I'll say 17 years.
Wow.
And just a few years ago, I finally was just like, it's not real. Yeah, just like long after I left and like had started thinking like it was all bull crap, that I would still like occasionally have dreams about hell, or have the like, what if I am wrong, and like what if it's as bad as it's been made out to be. So
yeah, I really do feel like that fear piece is what sinks in the deepest into the psyche, especially, and into the nervous system, because you can't verify it. That's the thing. The claim is so big, you can't verify it, and they bank on people just making the safe option. So then they do what they need to do to make church as comfortable as possible, and that can be from Catholic to evangelical to Unitarian, right? Make it as comfortable as possible for whoever's showing up. But the reality is that they're all still perpetuating that sort of afterlife of eternal suffering. Or, as I think Joyful talked about in his episode, there are certain beliefs about, what was it called? Where basically hell isn't eternal. And so there is like suffering, but then the soul is just extinguished, basically. And then there's just nothingness. Yes. So it's rough because the risk is so high. The gamble, the wager is so high that, what are you willing to risk to be true to yourself in this instance? What are you willing to risk to go against everything you've been raised to believe? So not only are you sort of facing this on the other side of the veil, like on the other side of death, what that can look like, but then also the weights of an entire childhood where your nervous system is being programmed, your body is being programmed, your mind's being, your emotions, all of these kinds of things are being programmed. So it's like you're fighting both this future that you can't verify or not verify, but then also like the past programming. And it's a lot for people to process all at once. And then you still have to do all of the adult things. Like you still have to pay like your light bills and put gas in your car and go to work and all these kinds of things. So between the mundane and existential dread, you're feeling, the entire range of everything.
Yeah.
So Seth, when you said like one day you were just like, it's not real, was there like a light switch moment for you, or was it more incremental, like just over time that fear just kind of wore off?
I would say it was pretty incremental. I don't know if I can think of any one like specific light bulb moment, but I will say that one thing that's really helped me solidify some of my beliefs is, discovering the deconstruction community on TikTok and just listening to so many scholars and people discussing the history of where these ideas came from and why so many people believe what they believe. And then like once you uncover the
foundation,
the foundation, or like the person behind the curtain, you're just like, oh, oh, that's where that came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's demystified.
yeah, it just like some things just start to seem incredibly silly, and you're just at least for me, it was just like, okay, well, like if that's where this came from, then there's just absolutely no reason to believe that. And I find that with a lot of things where, you know, we have all these like traditions and rituals that people take part in, and, you know, like culturally, yeah, like who am I to say if something's weird or bad, whatever. But there's just a lot of things where I'm just like, why the fuck do we do this? Like, why?
Yeah.
It's just some of the wild learning about how the temple was set up, and like how it was like, okay, this one area is for the Gentiles, and then this one area is for the women, but they can only go in this area. And then there's like a certain priest that there's only like one person that can go in this area, but we have to tie a rope to them in case God strikes them down while they're back in this secret area.
I see what you're saying. Like, where did they come up with this stuff?
Yeah, who was like, this is what we're doing? And so like it takes one person to come up with this crazy idea, and then it takes, I would assume, a bunch of people to decide like, yeah, that's a great idea, we should definitely do that. And I don't understand how some of these things are just like, well, this is what your grandmother did, you know, and this is what I did, and so you should do it too. And like that just extends to so many things that I feel are incredibly harmful. And I'd say one of those things is the idea of hell, where it's just like we have this idea of this very like descriptive version of hell in the Bible, but it doesn't even really seem like that's the thing.
Yeah.
Once you start to learn about stuff like that, it's like, why would I waste time and energy and like fears on this idea that some fantasy author came up with, you know, or something like that,
who may have been on like drugs, or who may have been like unwell, like nobody really knows, but it was just accepted over time and became standard. But one of the things that I am really enjoying about, you know, having these conversations with people is what is the sticking point for them, where they're like, this is what I needed to learn, this is what I needed to hear in order to, you know, completely shatter that illusion. Yeah, okay, I'm done. It's all bullshit. And it's fascinating how it really is seeming to be different for everyone. How did you find the deconstruction community?
So I have a friend who would send me TikToks, and this was back when I thought of it like Benny and I would go on it and just like, we thought it was solely for cringe content. And so we would go on there and just like watch really cringy videos and laugh about them. And so I had never downloaded it. I said I never would. And
I did the same thing.
Yeah. And then eventually I caved, and I think I was just like scrolling through videos, and I saw this guy. His name was Chaotic Dad. I don't know if you remember or you know who that is.
I've heard of that person.
And he's just like, he's a really like warm, sweet person that was talking about deconstruction. And it was like very clear that he didn't want debates. He just wanted to have conversations with people. And so I started like engaging in the chat, and people would come up and tell their story. And I, you know, just started talking to people. And I think like Schley, if you know who Schley is, she was one of the...
Do I know Schley? Shout out Schley.
she was like one of the first people that I remember talking to in there, because she would mod for him. And then Otter was in there. He was really big in that area. And there's a Discord that I ended up joining. And I eventually like ended up going up there and told my story. And it was just like, when I found it, it was so cool, because it was something that I clearly needed and had needed to find a community of people that understood and or could relate to the experience that I had growing up in the church, and had their own stories to tell. And you know, just like, I had no idea this existed, and I didn't know how much I needed it until I stumbled upon it. And so that like went on for a while, and Benny and I were, you know, talking to him pretty regularly, and then he just eventually kind of stopped going live, and I haven't seen him around in a long time. But then I stumbled across Justin, started watching Justin, and then I remember watching Joyful, and then I started like talking to him and DC, because he was friends with Chaotic Dad too.
Wow.
And so I like trying to kind of boost up DC and Joyful. So Joyful, for the longest time, he was not using a mic, and it would like crack really bad, and it would like drive me insane. And I felt like it was causing him to not get as many viewers. And I was like, I really wanted to help boost him. And so I'm like, make a wish list on Amazon and put a mic on it. I'll get it for you. Like, if anything, for my own sanity, it's like, I want to listen to you, but that noise.
You're like, help me out.
Help me help you.
Right.
And then like I got DC a mic, and then from there, like, started like meeting more people, and like Benny got really involved, obviously. And when he got his diagnosis last year, he wanted to like have a Discord just that included all of his friends, and from TikTok. So originally it was just called Benny's Friends. And you know, it was just like a few people in there, and then obviously now it's become what it's become, with, you know, almost 3,000 or over 3,000 members now.
Wow. Yeah, I had no idea. I mean, I like heard that it wasn't really meant to be what it was, but what I find most shocking in this conversation is the fact that you were the OG, not the other way around. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and you know, Benny definitely has a different story. Like, he didn't really go to church that much, and he was not somebody that was as into it as I was.
Yeah. When we were talking about, you know, wanting to have you and Benny involved, I thought it was so funny that Benny was like, I mean, I'm happy to do it, but my story's not that interesting. I went to children's school, learned about hell, and was scared and noped out of it. And I'm like, oh man, if that was more of us, we would have been saved so much grief. But he's just so funny. I love that.
Shortest episode ever.
Right. Well, thanks for tuning in, guys.
Yeah.
That is
so I wish I would have had that option.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm really shocked that that was the starting point, was I have these friends, I'm going to make a Discord so we can all connect, and here we are.
Yeah.
That makes it all the more powerful, you know, what Benny's put together.
Yeah, and it was just like, about a year ago too, like a little
Wow.
less than a year ago or over a year ago that he
It's a
created
lot of
it.
change
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
short amount of
A
time.
lot of
There's
growth.
Yeah.
just like so much going on in there.
Yeah, there really
Mm-hmm.
is. But I think that really speaks to how much people needed a community where, like you said, you can share your story and hear other stories and, people can relate. I think that the need for something like this was so big that we're seeing in real time the influx of people coming in so fast because these kinds of spaces are, what we're missing, especially in today's age when, we have so much that we can do with, technology and internet and all of that. And I know we're not the only atheist space, but I like to think that, and maybe I'm just biased, but I like to think that we are very like community oriented, not so much about a particular product, if that makes sense.
Right. No, I agree.
Yeah.
That the community aspect is super cool.
Yeah.
And just seeing the way that people show up for each other.
Yeah. And we're growing, every day, not just in numbers, but in what we're trying to do for the community. And I also really like to see that as well. But are we caught up to today?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So we've reached that point where we want to start talking about reconstruction. So you've deconstructed over time, then you had to get to that point where you started, reconstructing, your belief system, your like how you find enjoyment in life, so on and so forth. So we have some questions. Garnet, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. What are you most proud about?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I would say to answer that as best I can, that I frequently think about where I'm at in life and just kind of marvel at how much I have and how as rough as things in the world are, and like it's not like my life is perfect. There's a lot of things that I wish were different, but I just feel incredibly lucky to be alive in this time and like be able to be a gay person that is able to be in a loving relationship and like have a partner that appreciates me and that I appreciate, and just like I got a house and a fat cat that's laying on his back underneath me. And just like I think I'm a pretty lucky guy for the most part. So like I'm proud of the life that I've built and the things that I've been through, and I'm still standing.
I love that, especially when you consider where you came from, way back when you everywhere you turned was a lack of support, people telling you that, there was something wrong with you or you were wrong. You may have never thought that you would have the life that you have today. And here you are, and you're happy and you're enjoying it. I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something where it's like I think about like what was in my future and like what was I supposed to want, or like the life that I feel like was designed for me or intended for me. And just like the sense of dread, like, is that really going to be my life? I'm just kind of like pretending to want these things that I don't want, like thinking about having a wife and like, going the like cookie cutter route, it's just like I am thinking like I'm never like this idea of like being with a man that was just not gonna happen. Like that was a pipe dream, and the fact that I have that now is like pretty wild.
Aww. I'm so glad you're living your authentic life. Good for you.
Thank you.
Question 2, what internal changes have you observed since your deconstruction?
Say my confidence has improved. Just one thing that I didn't touch on was in college, again, like when I was like working on trying to decide if I wanted to continue being a Christian or like how was that going to look, I had this phase where like I felt like I was constantly sinning, to where it's like, you know, in the Bible it says not to worry, and so like by worrying about sinning right now, I'm sinning. And just how like crazy that made me feel. And even before that, like that's a very specific memory I have. A point where I was like, I cannot like go down this path. I'm gonna like end up having to be committed because I just like I cannot stop thinking about this. But even before that, it was those feelings of like, am I doing this right? Like every thought is scrutinized. You know, there's this idea that you're not supposed to be comfortable ever because you belong to God. And like,
the whole thing is set up that you're never going to be enough. You'll never be good enough. You'll never reach that finish line until you die, basically. And yeah, I could see that, you know, impacting someone's confidence. And then once you drop that, along with that fear and, you know, that doubt, I could see then you're able to blossom. 100%.
Yeah, and just being able to like, you know, feeling like I can breathe again, you know, like I'm not constantly feeling the weight of like sin and like what is my eternity gonna look like. And also, have you shared the gospel with somebody today?
All the pressure.
It's just like pressure, and like not like being able to let go of that. It was just very liberating. Very liberating.
So what do you want to learn?
I want to learn how to be just a better advocate for others who are in the early stages of deconstruction, just how to be a better helper and listener for those people, because, you know, thankfully I had a few good friends to listen to me and give me advice, but I also understand how incredibly isolating that can be. And, you know, I just want to do what I can to help other people not be alone when they're going through that, because it's a lot.
Yeah. And other people is how we get through it, you know, both finding the information that we need to help our process and then, you know, supporting the people. And 100%. I will say, are you like familiar with JD? Are you in his Discord?
I don't think so.
Okay, because he is wanting to do a support group, and so we don't necessarily have something quite like that in like Deconstruction Junction. And I think that as maybe that grows, maybe that'll be a good way to like really get hands on, if you will, you know, get in there and, you know, chat with people who are going through it, and just an idea. Or maybe Seth starts his own support group, you know, just some ideas.
It's an idea.
Yeah. Who or what inspires you?
The community as a whole is definitely inspiring. Just how much action there is and how hard people work. Specifically, like I call out like Joyful is inspiring, Crystal is inspiring.
I feel that.
And like Crystal specifically, just how active she is. And how much she's putting in the work. And she also just her story and how much that she's been through, and then how much of a mama bear she is. And like
of the community.
How tough she is. And I feel like it's appropriate though, like she doing it because she's a protector. And so like if you come for her people, she's gonna have an issue with that.
She's gonna tell you what's up.
And I love that.
She's also a very nice lady.
Yes.
She is. She is.
I tell her she's the sassiest nice lady there ever was.
Yeah. Obviously Benny, I'm inspired by Benny, who's just all the shit that he went through, especially, this past year, and how much work he does for the community, and
Yeah.
just this whole beast that he's created.
Yeah. In the very best way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know like he's putting in the work too. So that's inspiring.
Absolutely. Got to give Benny his flowers as well, especially since we
Of course.
can't do it to his face because he doesn't want to be on our show. So, but
Benny, we love you.
indeed. I was going to say, especially with, like his journey, over the last year, not everybody could go through something like that and still, be happy and enjoy life and, still be even a good person for that matter. I think that it really speaks volumes to who he is as a person, to be who he is today, given what he's been through, for sure.
Exactly.
And that's actually because I know that Benny is truly and honestly such a good person to his core that I had a feeling I would feel the same way about you. And this conversation has confirmed that. So I'm glad that you guys have each other. Great fit.
Thanks. Me too.
So what is your passion?
I'd say I've been very passionate about
getting swole for Satan.
Exactly, my fitness. Like, that also goes back to the confidence thing. I mean, that's just something that it's been a struggle for me pretty much my entire life. And like the one thing I've found that helps a lot with that is working out, being able to see progress, and then just overall like feeling better about myself. It's very important for me to like feel good about myself. And I think for a very long time I was just like so resigned to not, that I just kind of like lived with it. And since I have been feeling better about myself, and then like, well, that's one reason why you were so depressed, probably was like you just wanted to like hide from everybody. And but like that's been really huge for me. And I would say that's my passion right now. I know it's probably not the most exciting thing, but that's...
No, 100% it is, because it's not easy to undertake that particular, goal, if you will, and stick to it. Yeah, you look great.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, I meant it when I said that you're getting more and more ripped every day. Where do you find your joy?
Say like coming home after a long day at work and like seeing how excited Otis gets to see me. That's something that brings me a lot of joy. And spending time with Benny and just the way that we laugh together sometimes is just pretty great. That brings me a lot of joy. And I love spring, and so I'm hoping this weekend I can get outside and like work in the yard, because that's something that also brings me happiness. Yeah.
That's awesome. What would you like to contribute to this community?
Like, I have this idea of, since I've been doing the fitness stuff, that I'm not trying to be, I don't want to be pushy or anything, but I think like the health and fitness side of it, like I would like to see more people, get into that in whatever way they choose. Like, it doesn't have to be
shredded.
You don't have to get shredded, nothing like that. But I know that's one thing that I have to offer is, it's something that I've been pretty into, and that's one thing I can contribute.
So what
that's
you're
just
saying is
one idea.
The Deconstruction Junction is soon going to have its own trainer?
I think so. Yeah.
Hey!
Maybe we could do like video classes over Discord.
Yeah.
Yoga.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That sounds so
would
fun.
be awesome.
Yeah. Because that's my thing too, is when it comes to fitness, I have so much trouble with like accountability and even sometimes motivation. But anytime I have someone else to do it with, it's so much easier.
It's true. It's true.
That would cover that aspect.
Yeah. I will say that if you do decide to do something like that, Seth, I will make it mandatory that Kitty needs to be there overseeing everything, making sure you're doing the
Oh,
lifts properly,
I
all the
mean,
kinds of
if
things.
I'm on camera, he'll definitely be around. He knows.
Just kidding.
Well, I look forward to seeing that.
Sure, we can make it happen.
Okay, because, big things are in the works for the Deconstruction Junction. So if we don't
Yeah.
have Seth's support group, then I would love to see Seth. I don't know. I can't think of something fun to say, but our Deconstruction Junction trainer, Seth. That's all I got for right now. Final question. What do you hope to receive from this community?
Just continued support, which I feel like I'm
Mhm.
getting. And yeah, just people continue to show up like they have been and
Yeah.
engage with the community and sharing it out to other people that you think might need it. Because clearly there are a lot of people that do.
100%. All right. Well, Seth, is there anything else you would like to add today?
I don't think so. Just thank you both for having me. I really appreciated the conversation. Always nice to
Yeah.
talk to you both.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely. This was
likewise.
super nice because we were saying, like you're more so kind of like a bubble in the chat for the most part.
Yep.
Like now I know you as a person, and it's really nice.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for being here, and we appreciate you sharing your journey with us.
For those of you listening, please make sure you like, subscribe, and share your thoughts on today's episode with us below in the comments. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Not learning.